further the case for opposition, a common definition of opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that they're the ones who did not understand our proposal. Because the people who engage, for example, in organ trade will be lower in the priority of the list of those people who want to have transplant of organs. But they have mandatory organ surrender once they die. What is the rationale of this policy? The rationale of this policy is that so they won't be parasites to the state, they can still be worth it investments for the state, Mr. Chair, and members of this House. This is the reason why I have 3 rebuttals for today. The first thing I want to rebut is this whole idea of illegality. Because it is illegal, you are going to deny them. First question is, illegality isn't absolute because there is a moral dilemma for the individual and there's a moral dilemma for the state. Because the motivation why they did this was because they are in dire circumstances. They don't have money, for example, to feed their families, Mr. Chair, and members of House. The question is, why is this not a valid sit-down and legitimate motivation for them to take? But the second question is, what if there is a resource? Because here we're going to expand, for example, the frame. Because it isn't just about scarce resources. It's about, for example, blood transfusion. The question is, are you still going to deny them of that? If the state has a resource, Mr. Chair, and members of House. But thirdly, we think that this is antithetical to the principles of welfare states because even drug users are rehabilitated and drug using is illegal, Mr. Chair, and members of House. This is a crime. So the question or the moral dilemma of illegality isn't absolute. But the second thing I want to rebut is that people should be prioritized. First, yes, they are going to be prioritized, Mr. Chair, and members of House. This is the reason why in our proposal, they're going to be lower in priority those people who have had illegal acts, Mr. Chair, and members of House. But this third idea that I want to rebut from when it benefits the black market, Mr. Chair. The first question is this a deterrent policy? We think if you want to deter them, you don't. Why? Because they're still going to engage in organ trade, Mr. Chair, and members of House, because you deny them money for healthcare. They would want to have money, for example, Mr. Chair, and members of House, to medicate themselves because they are sick, Mr. Chair, and members of House. Because you deny them of state support, they're going to go more underground because they don't have money, Mr. Chair, and members of House. Moreover, we solve the black market, Mr. Chair, and members of House, because you decrease the motivation for them going to the black market because you still have state support, Mr. Chair, and members of House. We're going to solve the moral dilemma of the state and the economic dilemma in my argument. Before anything else, yes, state.
But Levis, in the first half minute of your speech, you said you're going to deprioritize individuals on organ donation list if they make the choice to get these organs legally. Aren't you making a value judgment on the illegal choice they made?
Yes, because it's illegal. Therefore, we are going to lower their priority. But what we are going to do, Mr. Chair, and members of House, we recognize that there still people should be prioritized, Mr. Chair. But we are saying you must not deny them of state care, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. Let's go to the argument of the maximization of allocation and getting scarce resources, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. Because the premise is this: as the government has already conceded that there's a moral and economic dilemma from the state. A, the dilemma of allocating these scarce resources, but B, how to get more resources to be able to reduce human suffering and resolve this dilemma. In this case, Mr. Chair, the state enters the economics of priorities. In your proposal, what you do is to make this dilemma more apparent. Why? Because what you do is deny them across the board, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. From opposition, even these people who donated these organs are still a viable market to harvest these organs. Because from the proposal, we said that if you die and if you are charged of this crime, Mr. Chair, and members of the House, you will have to surrender your organs to the state. Therefore, the state is going to have a steady back, and these are viable markets, Mr. Chair, for scarce resources of these organs, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. So this dilemma can now be solved, because you have now a steady resource from these people who are dying, but are still, as you said, parasites from the state, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. We think that the trade-off isn't denial. The trade-off is for them to be productive citizens of the state, for them to still contribute to the state, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. We think in this particular regard, we are being consistent with the principles of a welfare state, Mr. Chair, and members of House, that your right to be able to receive state care is an inalienable right, Mr. Chair, and members of House. The welfare state should be inclusive rather than exclusive, Mr. Chair, and members of House. We think that their proposal is a problem-solution mismatch, because what you do is we think that there's two different battles. There's no causal link between solving organ donation or the underground trade, Mr. Chair, and members of House, and denying them of this specific resource, Mr. Chair, and members of House. But for anything else, yes.
Why should the state have to pay for the cost of that choice, while at the same time the black market runs all the way to the bank with the money made?
The first burden is, are you going to deny state care for those people who are using drugs, Mr. Chair, and members of House? Because these people who still undergo drugs, Mr. Chair, and members of House, are still rehabilitated by the state. These people are still taken care of by the state, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. So the dilemma there, Mr. Chair, and members of House, that just because it is illegal doesn't mean you have to deny them of state care. Sit down. We think it's more imperative. It's a moral imperative of the state to bring them back to the system, Mr. Chair, and members of House, of making sure that they still contribute to the state, Mr. Chair, and members of House. But on the second idea, why the right to state care is an inalienable right, Mr. Chair, and members of House, because this is not an allocated right by the state. The state, what you do in your proposal is the state reneging on the social contract of being able, for example, to protect you as an individual, Mr. Chair, and members of the House. And we think through our proposal, the state doesn't need to do that. The state doesn't need to deny you, Mr. Chair, and members of House, of healthcare and medical treatment, Mr. Chair, and members of House. What they do in their proposal is you leave them off the bat, Mr. Chair, and members of House, and you leave them there on the side. We think that isn't what a welfare state stands for, Mr. Chair, and members of House. So what should you remember from my speech? Firstly, you must solve the problem of scarce resource. That you must solve. Secondly, you must solve these resources getting from the state if they're dying, Mr. Chair, and members of House. But thirdly, you must remember that you don't have to be inconsistent with your principles. With all of those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Sum up the substantive case to decide the common judgment with Rehabilitation.
This is a debate about trade-offs. This is not a debate about us denying resources that we already have in abundance to people and we want them to die. This is a debate about how do we make choices in situations where we need to make choices. It's not fair, Mr. Speaker, for them to say, we want to help everyone, and as long as we can help in the situation where we can help everyone, you still shouldn't help everyone. That's not fair. We're not going to accept that. This is not what this debate is about. These states set this context up right from the start, and if they wanted to contend it, they should have. Right now, it's too late to do that, right? If we have the resources, we will give them the resources. But we don't have the resources, what do we do? They spend a lot of time talking about, it's not just about the question of having kidneys. It's about whether you have enough dialysis machines, if you have enough anti-rejection drugs, if you have enough of all these resources. In the situation where we don't have resources, how do we prioritize the allocation of those resources? One person will die. Which is the person that needs to die? We think it's the person who followed the rule of law. Okay? So that's the debate that we're going to have. It's not fair for them to say we need to be an evil dictative state, and that's what we need to defend. Alright? I'm going to talk about three areas of clash in today's debate. One is this notion of whether or not it's a real or false choice. Second is the notion of the impact that this has on organized crime. And finally is the idea that Roland brought in his speech, which I think will be more powerful to start, whether or not this is an inalienable right, and how do we deal with the notion of inalienable right. I'll give you a point now to clarify.
But what if there is a resource? Are you going to still deny them of this?
If there is a resource, we won't deny them that resource because that resource exists. Okay? Now, look, what you're trying to make us do is say that we have shitloads of resources, we want people to die for no particular reason, then we are vengeful. Right? If that's the case, and if the judges think that that's a fair burden, and that's what the motion asks us to defend, then I'm sorry, we lose. We're not going to say... We're not going to say that governments need to be evil and vengeful. Okay? And if I need to lose because of that, then I will. But I don't think this is what this debate is about. This is a debate about how to make difficult choices. You can come up and say, prioritize based on need. You can come up and say, first come, first serve. You can give us a different prioritization system. You conceded to lower their priority because they make these choices. Right? So I think you're joining us on this side of the house. You accept our framework of prioritization. You did not provide a different framework of prioritization on your side of the house to contend with our framework of prioritization. You cannot say we don't want to prioritize and you want to prioritize. We think that's just not fair. Now, let's go on to these notions of the clashes. Is this or is this not a false choice? They say there's a huge moral dilemma that's involved in the situation. We agree. We think there's also a moral dilemma in terms of where people want to give the organs out to other people, right? We think it doesn't necessarily apply. It's not a false choice. Why? Because some people still choose to go with the NHS. And when some people can make that choice, then it ultimately cannot be a false choice, right? Because otherwise, everyone would ultimately only go to the black market. We also say that, furthermore, that this choice harms the NHS, which is why it makes this interesting. It's not just about how those individuals interact with themselves. And you can see some of those individuals are very desperate. But the choice that they're making now harms the state. It harms other individuals. It harms the people who choose to stick with the NHS. They have done nothing wrong. They trusted the system. They made the sacrifices necessary, and we are punishing them. We are saying that we are going to give this scarce resource that we do not have, be it an organ, be it a dialysis machine, be it drugs, to someone else who chose to take the easy way out, Mr. Speaker. We think that's not fair. We also think that they extend this analysis to all forms of crime. Then you're going to have serious problems. NC brought this up in his speech, and it wasn't responded to. People do bad things all the time because of desperation. That does not make those things less bad, Mr. Speaker. We still punish those people. They still face the consequences. We think that applies in this situation. Secondly, this notion of organized crime. We say you're subsidizing crime in this situation. You allow people to commit these things. So you allow organized crime to make all these shortcuts because the NHS will pick up the tab. They will suture the wounds that you did not fix properly, and the organized crime can make the buck in between, right? They say what we want to do is make them a poster child to fight organized crime. You say you don't do that. You make them a poster child to encourage people to go there. You say, look at me, I went to organized crime, I got this donor or this organ, now I'm soaking up the resources of the state to fix it. I did not suffer the consequences of my mistakes, Mr. Speaker, when I took a shortcut, when I supported a criminal organization who does all kinds of evil things like murder and rape unicorns, Mr. Speaker. We do not want those things to support those organizations. They further said, what you're going to do now is you're going to push them further underground. And we accept that some of this may happen. We say people do not have any choice whatsoever, and we just reject it from the state, then unfortunately they will have to seek that elsewhere. They may have to go to private organizations. They may need to appeal to the church or to God. But we say they made that first choice. Unfortunately, they made their first choice to go underground. When other people were waiting in line, when other people were trying legal means and recourses, when other people stuck with the system, they chose. They were the first ones. No, thank you, sir. They were the first ones to go out of the system, and that's a problem. Everything we need to try to fix that problem and discourage people. But upon making that choice, why then is someone else who stuck with the system punished? We think that's unfair. There is no point in that debate responding to that. Finally, this idea of the NHS being an inalienable right, that everyone deserves some form of healthcare. We say, we do agree, we think everybody does, but they do until these individuals did get that right, until they chose to negate it by going outside the system, right? So we're not randomly removing it for them. The same way that everybody has the right to vote until you go to prison and you lose that right because you purposely did something that caused you to lose that right, okay? We say furthermore, it's not just about, they say, creates an active citizen and so on and so forth, and you concede that, right? Maybe people will become better. But what they have done has hurt the state. We need to discourage this activity of them hurting the state, and they need to respond to that. It's not that it is a zero-sum game, Mr. Speaker, because the state has lost something because of their actions. They said, look, are you also going to deny drug users treatment then, right? If it's a question of an allocation of resources, then yes, because you did something illegal, now you want to take away resources from someone who didn't do something illegal, who stuck with the system. We think that's just not fair. If it's not removing those resources, then fine. So, coming back to summarize these issues, Mr. Speaker, what's firstly and most importantly, the context in which this debate happens. This does not happen in the context where the world is overflowed with kidneys and dialysis machines. In that situation, we would not be having this debate. We'll give it to whoever needs it. We're not standing up here to say that we should be evil. This debate happens in the real world. The real world, and we need to make these real and difficult choices. How do we make these choices? We gave you a system of prioritization. They kind of accepted it. They did not give you a different framework of prioritization. I'm waiting to hear one from the third speaker.
The reason why Dog Curry will be stuck in the semifinals is because they skirted their burden in today's debate. The operative word of the motion is denied. That means that the state has the capacity in some instances to give you that right. Like when you POI Danny denies you because she can. In those instances wherein the state can give you that resource, why is it that the legitimate response of the state is to deny you that resource? For example, dialysis. For example, amputation of your leg in order for that disease to not, grow in your body at the end of the day. That is the heart of the debate, that you are not engaging in the semifinals, ladies and gentlemen. Because we can agree with you. We said the trade-off of that past decision is the prioritization. But we don't think that you're not absolutely you don't have an absolutely less stakeholder in the system just because of a bad decision in the past, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this House. This is the reason why we did not defend the action in the past being something right. We did not even defend that they should be an automatic priority in the first place. What we said is that there is a trade-off for being a legitimate part of the system, surrendering your organs that are functioning once you are dead, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this House. The debate is this. If the resource is scarce, then obviously it would be on a case-to-case basis. We will still give them that if they are proven to be the next in line. But there are other resources in which the state can give. The debate is, in these instances, why does the state want an overly punitive face just because in the past, regardless of your motivation and moral dilemma, you engage the organ trade to begin with? This is the reason why I have two issues in today's debate. The first is the strategic position of the state in forwarding the health industry, and second, co-opting people back to the system that actually abandoned the state and other systems at the end of the day. The second is, how do you best maximize individuals who are also resources even if they've engaged the illegal organ trading system in the end state?
How are you possibly going to create your sustainable method of taking an opt-in model if people are busy selling their organs to the black market for profit?
Ladies and gentlemen, I actually engaged the black market in the past. I don't have a kidney now, but I need dialysis, I need other healthcare services from the state. And I think that they're the only institution that I can go to. I go there, then I waive my right to my body parts once I die, as a consequence of that particular actions in the past. But the only justification coming from them in the first issue is, they did go to the state-sponsored institutions to actually solve their problem. We think that the fact that they walk in hospitals now is the tangible manifestation that they want help from the state, that they want to be co-opted in the system, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why drug addicts who surrender themselves to the state are rehabilitated on a voluntary basis, because there is a potential for them to be integrated in societies at the end of the day. These are the arguments that they were very arrogant to even respond to. They tell us that it's because of illegality, ladies and gentlemen. The state, under government bench, intensifies the perception of abandonment. When the counter characterization coming from opposition is that they might be victims of circumstances. And even if they are not victims of circumstances, the actions of the past can be mitigable by disincentives and trade-offs without dehumanizing the state. Absolutely, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why you suspend criminals to actually vote. But once they are freed, they can still engage the system, because that assumes that when they serve their punishment, they can still be individuals that the state can trust, because the state has the ability to rehabilitate and integrate them at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. What you're doing in your policy is a basic cop-out policy. See, I discourage you from going to the black market. You didn't listen to me. Suffer the consequences. That is not a state that is responsible, even to those individuals that already surrendered itself, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. We think, on a second level, their argument about black market, how do you do that under your policy? We say that the counter burden also applies to your side. How do you balance that out in your model when the same people who have the purchasing power to actually buy illegal organs in the black market can still be using non-state sponsored systems, and it will still be dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. At least in our proposal, there is no elitist nature of the state that automatically makes the individual look at the rhetorical capital of the black market as something more sustainable and easier in terms of getting economic purchasing power, such as monetary compensation, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. The motivation of the individual is not the debate. The debate is how does the state respond to them when they want to be a part of the system again. That wasn't clear in Logan's speech, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. We think in your model, you're not co-opting them in the system, back to the system, because what you do is to make the state renege to its promise, ladies and gentlemen. We already discussed the creation of a state as something that is actually human regardless of your mistakes in the past. We think that on the first issue, it's not a principally justified state response because the state does not forward its own promises in the future. That's why the proposal and all the POIs were very reasonable in today's debate. For example, blood transfusion, dialysis, and leg amputation. These things, ladies and gentlemen, is what are things that the state can give. But the state will not give them under their policy. At best, because of Logan saying that we don't live in an overly harmful state-sponsored something, we think that they say that you're just prioritizing them, which is not their burden at the end of the day. But on a second level, the usage of individuals, which is something absolutely untouched, coming from opposition bench. We said, ladies and gentlemen, that individuals still have to be socially mobile even after they engage the black market. When we ask them, because of their actions in the past, what kind of rights do they still have right now? Because according to them, they will deny them healthcare rights. But we think that healthcare rights are enabler of other rights, ladies and gentlemen, because health is what makes you function in society at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. What does the policy do? You create a state benefit, a trade-off between the state and the individual who committed a wrong action in the past. The prioritization is the consequence that the state is willing to take, and I think that's perfectly legitimate, but that doesn't mean that you won't get anything in the end. The second issue, the second sub-issue under this is the benefit of creating emotionally resonant campaigns. The most effective people in order for the other society members to be discouraged from engaging the black market, ladies and gentlemen, and members of this house. We think that the humanized nature of the state under our policy can make these people who are co-opted back by the state to say and tell society the state is not as bad as you think it is. You can ask them for help and you have an economically resourceful state because of what you're doing. The state in return gets your organs and can actually subsidize those people who need it once you die. This is a trade-off we are willing to actually take into this debate. They never responded. We think that we should debate in the final round. Thank you.
And the opposition, each case for opposition side, problem opposition reply again.
listened really well to the government, and we isolated that scarcity was really the only problem that they were operating on, which is why our counter model told you really that we wanted to deal with that first, by making all individuals give up all their organs so that you would have a steadier market for organs and you would have more people being finally able to have 2 kidneys again. We think that it's pretty straightforward. If you're to analyze this debate, there are 3 questions to really reconcile while opposition takes this. Number 1 is, how does the state even try to fulfill its responsibility to citizens? Really, we want to look at the way that the punitive government side wants to function is to send a very strong message to individuals who do not follow the law. That ultimately, if you make a mistake, regardless of the reasons for that mistake and the desperation that forced you into those corners, you can no longer be afforded any kind of care by the system. And we think, and we've said, what is likely is that what you will need in terms of healthcare is to deal with a messy surgery that happened because you participated in the illegal organ trade. It's particularly that risk that makes it so much more of an imperative for the state to help you because you made that mistake in the past. But then they tell us on the haves and have-nots that really there are greater divides. We agree. We even said that what you do is leave the people who don't have any other money and any other place to go to die. And that doesn't kill the cycle of continuing to have people in the black market. All it really does is that these people die out without having said the message that it wasn't the right thing to do. We think that that was why we needed to make sure that these people had a voice and actually survived to tell the horror stories of what they experienced. But the second question, and this is really where there are crucial discussions from both sides, is how is the black market even dealt with? Government side talked about the usual crackdown arguments, but really they told us that their deterrence was from their proposal, that they wanted to deny care from the people who did this crime because they actually wanted them to send a strong message that no, you shouldn't do that ever again, and that is definitely not strategic if you want to receive healthcare ever again. But we've said that's been a twisted mechanism because ultimately all you really do is exclude people from a system that they already feel excluded from. That's the real reason why their desperation is underpinned, because they feel like there's no other way to go to the state. There are no jobs, there's no healthcare, probably no food and no employment. That's why we think that that's where you need to come in, as a state that cares and as a state that is able to forgive. We think that ultimately, when you deal with that, you tap into the real rationale for the black market's success. They never responded to our ideas of the cycle that continues because the industry actually preys on these individuals that continue to have this desperate mindset and still see the state as an enemy. We think that that's what's crucial. It really changes the root cause of the black market really trying to be stopped at the end of the day. But the last question is simple. Is it possible, really, for the state to be forgiving of individuals that made mistakes? This is where the moral dilemma comes into play. Because ultimately what they told us was that the crime is an end-all, be-all, and there is no way to somehow find forgiveness in that regard. We've talked to you about rehabilitation for drug users, and we've talked to you about the state and how its interest is really to make sure that citizens can come back and feel like their state can provide for them, because maybe they can also provide to the state in return. But what we think they've forgotten is that these individuals, although they've made mistakes and although they have been engaged in crime, can pay the ultimate price, that being waiting for much longer to get an organ eventually. But still what we think is a promise that the state always has to give is that it is fulfilling its basic responsibilities to its citizens. That it does care and that it will do what it can to provide organs for you if you need them. And if it needs basic healthcare because you did a botched up surgery somewhere else, we think that it's still the state's mandate to say that it's so sad that you had to go to this desperate need, and ultimately we still want to make sure that you get care and you don't have to die astray. Thank you.
Let the opposition reply to a speech. Someone in the debate as a whole, I thought the national reply
Mr. Speaker, forgiveness is cheap when it's not you who pays the cost of that forgiveness. Forgiveness is easy to want in a debate when it's not you who has to pay the consequences. Because we pointed out, this is not a debate that happens without cost. Your side is denying people who have waited in line, who have chosen the legitimate path, access to healthcare, not just organs. We're essentially saying that this debate takes place within scarcity. So I'm going to do a number of things in my reply. I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping because it's telling when the last speaker on the other side goes, this is what the debate is about. It generally means they probably didn't get it from the start. Secondly though, I'm going to talk about the idea of principles. Then I'm going to talk about the idea of practicalities. Housekeeping. All the good stuff they talked about, right, we're more than happy to adopt it. The opt-out policy, the education, even having the poster child, although our poster child would be those after they donated organs and didn't get healthcare, right? We're more than happy to do that, and we don't think they've demonstrated mutual exclusivity between all three speeches on why we can't do it on our side. We're more than happy to take the measures that will reduce the amount of illegal organ ownership. But then this is where the debate kind of got unhinged a bit, because they came in debate and they hung their hat on this idea that the only reason our case can apply is in the event of scarcity. They're going to go, we're going to solve scarcity as a whole. Then they took on the burden to prove how. Right? They needed to show you how their policy is going to change the situation. Because beyond that assertion at the start, they never told you how it's going to work. They never told you where the impetus in society would come, where people wouldn't opt out. All they did was throw it as a quick panacea just to make sure they didn't have to engage in this. And this is my biggest complaint. Because they tried to eliminate the conflict from the debate. They tried to force us into a corner. I think Logan put this the best of all. They tried to force us into a corner which is untenable for any state, to say that when we have enough, people should still die. When we can support everyone, people should still die. And I accept what Logan said. If that's what you want us to prove, we are happy to lose this debate. But more than that, we say, bringing it back, we said, the reality is, and they acknowledged this context when I started it up, there is scarcity. There isn't enough. These countries are third world countries. And anyone who's an average reasonable person here knows what the situation is like in those countries. So let's go into the principles then of today's debate. Let's talk about this inalienable right that they talked about. It's so inalienable that essentially they too will prioritize those who did not take illegal market organs over those who did. Wow. Mr. Speaker, I have a number of ideas that they could have run. Maybe a need-based comparison of first come, first serve. Because fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, while arguing inalienable right, they made it quite alienable themselves. But more than that, Mr. Speaker, they didn't respond to any of our material on how this is a wrong choice and the social contract. You exclude yourself from the state support when you choose to, the state shouldn't bear the consequences of your choice when you made a choice that the state doesn't just not mandate, but prohibits you from doing so. Then they came with this whole desperation and lack of information material. We pointed out firstly, we said morally desperation to then justify any crime, and we said unacceptable. There was no response to the debate moving to that point. But in terms of lack of information, we're more than happy, and we put this in my model, to provide that information. Let's talk about the practicalities. Let's talk about the harms. The state that is already scarce on resources has to bear the cost and deny others access to healthcare because it's treating more people. Remember, donating the organs is actively harming yourself. You might not have needed that healthcare otherwise. More than that though, in terms of the black market, because they too want to keep it legal, which paradigm deals with the black market better? This is where NC's material was particularly relevant. When he talked about how essentially you are taking on, you're subsidizing the black market because they get the profits, they don't pay the cost. Choices and consequences, Mr. Speaker. When you make a poor choice, you have to face the consequences. Not the state, not the innocents who lose out because of your choice. We're proud to propose.